Welcome back. Previously, during what I can honestly not say is the slowest start to an RLCraft run I've ever experienced, I engaged, and succeeded in, the venerable and ancient Minecraftian tradition of getting wood. I also succeeded in using the wood to craft tools via a procedure that we will not be elaborating on for fear of drawing the attention of certain 8-legged butt-sword wielding individuals, and am finally able to start doing something other than right-clicking with a bucket. The first order of business was to clean up the island. A lot. This isn't strictly necessary from a mechanical perspective, since most of the cobble disaster piece I created is going to be outside of the 64-block mobs don't despawn range relative to my new mob farm, but it was phenomenally ugly to look at, and I need to pick up stone anyway, so there really wasn't any functional difference between fixing my jank to get building materials and making a cobblestone generator to get them. In the end, the only stone I left behind was the structural parts that I'm using for spawning mobs, and the main island platform and bridge thingy. And also a blob of misplaced cobble that is way too big for me to want to take out just yet. This isn't from a lack of desire, mind you, it's mostly just due to a lack of storage space. I can farm wood in small quantities from natural mob spawns, but there is a particular emphasis on the small part of that, so chests and other useful amenities like that are going to be in short supply for a little while. The bulk of this first stone harvest is going, of course, towards my mob farm. XP is still the keystone of RLCraft's progression, and I'm going to need to make up for my lack of everything else by leveraging the incredible potential of the Void World's mostly controlled mob caps if I want to progress meaningfully with it. Don't let the start fool you, this mod pack is nothing like New Horizons, which has literally like half a dozen mods solely dedicated to the creation of stuff out of nothing, and until my technology base has evolved a bit, mobs will be the primary and only source for most of my game state progression. Also on the list, due with that stone, is spawn-proof literally everything I can get my claws on. Vanilla torches require glowstone, or rare drops, or cheese that I don't have the ability to replicate to create them, and my only other light source is lava. So that means replacing all of the stone I put down earlier with bottom half slabs or covering it with cobblestone paths, and I obviously opted for the slab route here. I already did the spawn platform first thing. There will be no more random creepers blowing up my starting chest for me, thank you oh so very much. And after I finished up the rest of it, the only thing that was spared my tender ministrations was the stone bridge and the desert spawning platform, which I will be taking out and replacing with a far better mob farm design at a far more convenient Y level here in a little while. In doing so, I also discovered that zombie heads emit light for some reason. Not sure why. Also, cookies and gold shovels do as well, and cookies in particular are blindingly bright, so clearly there's something weird going on with the shader packs, but I can't really be bothered to fix it. With the basics of an XP generation system in place, my next task is to do a bunch of mob farming. As much as possible, I will try to minimize the amount of focus I spend on it during this run, but the fact of the matter is there is simply no way to progress without doing just a whole lot of it. My points of XP go to finishing my farming level grind up to level 12 to unlock bone meal usage, upping my building level 12 in order to be able to craft and place anvils, which are a weirdly important piece of tech in this episode, and then the rest of the points are fed into an eclectic mix of different skill trees and a couple of level up reloaded passives that I'm going to want to use. The most important part of these upgrades, standing head and shoulders above the rest, is the ability to use bone meal, though, which is kind of weird because bone meal in RLCraft was majorly nerfed compared to vanilla, and it can no longer add growth stages to crops, which is kind of what you normally use it for. Bone meal does, however, still have some interesting uses, the first of which being bulk grass and flower production. Flowers are a spawning requirement for nymphs and a source of dye, both of which are basically useless, but bulk grass production allows me to produce string and wool on demand, and breaking grass blocks can theoretically summon spriggans and triffids, so there are certain uses for it in farming lycanite mobs. A far better use for bone meal is, instead, maintaining the world's most needlessly aggressive sustainable forestry initiative. In the first episode, I mentioned that dynamic trees heal from damage. What I did not mention is the ridiculous extent to which this particular ability applies. Spoilers, it's a lot. The strategy works better with growth potions, admittedly, but as long as I leave a couple of logs at the base to grow back, I can lop off the entire rest of the tree and spam bone meal on it to regrow it, and it will behave just fine. It takes a lot of bone meal, yeah, but I also have a lot of bones, and chopping down what the game thinks is 90% of a tree has a chance to drop some acorns, which allows me to skip the whole wait for the seasons to change thing. Also, my slab floor can be clipped through by sitting on the slabs. This is unfortunate, and also seems kind of insulting, vaguely, but I can't quite put my finger on why. In the spirit of completionism, and also in the spirit of info-dumping weird tech tricks that are utterly irrelevant in the base game, this isn't even the only way I can get wood now. Level Up Reloaded has a passive called Lumbering that has a chance of giving you extra wood drops whenever you break wood, by which it actually means logs. Currently, it is pretty terrible, and with 2 levels, I only have a 6% chance of it firing per log, but bone farming still takes a bit, so this is a surprisingly serviceable alternative if you have no acorns but do have some spare XP to put into the levels. Having secured myself a handful of sustainable enough ways of producing bulk storage, I can now engage in the next part of my master plan, which is beating a whole bunch of things in the ankles with literally anything I can pick up off the ground that does damage, and stealing their pocket change, and their socks. All of the XP I earn from this lovely activity is then immediately invested in improving a Level Up Reloaded skill called Smelting Efficiency, each level of which adds a 4% chance of doubling my smelting rewards when cooking things in a furnace. The ability is a little strong. It isn't unbelievably busted, thanks largely to the relative lack of smeltable things in this pack's mod loadout, but it is particularly great for improving the yields of iron, gold, bronze, and silver that I get when I cook down all of my junk infernal gear. And there are some really funny interactions with stone in the late game that I might need to exploit for bulk material production if I can't figure out how to get more lava buckets. During this time, I also am on the lookout for what is basically the discount airdrop of the run, which is a zombie with a backpack. This is because, when zombies with backpacks are killed, you get to keep their backpack, which is full of all sorts of useful items, smeltable goodies, and just plain old dungeon loot. They also clip you through the floor and drop you in the void if you place them on slabs, which I found out the hard way. Rest in peace, XP levels. You definitely weren't important to my long-term survival at all. So the loot drops may be nice, and the XP may be flowing, but mob farming is very much not all fun and games. The largest problem by far are tremors, which are a mod that seems custom designed specifically to be the biggest possible pain in my keister. Their gimmick is that they randomly blow up the area they spawn in, which would be fine if they were spawning in a naturally generated cave or something, but that little personality quirk is a cat of a different color when it manifests inside your delicately constructed mob farms, made out of cobblestone. They are rare, thank goodness, but clearly future farm designs will need either a higher standard of construction or better material budgets. Aside from tremors or bad creeper interactions, my farm design works pretty well, and in an hour or so I've played the stupid game enough to max out my smelting skill, and it's time to cash in on my stupid prizes. Of which there are many. Obvious wins are any gear that can be smelted, gold can be used to craft a few trinkets and as a disposable tool crafting material for saws and the like, and bronze is pretty much useless for anything other than turning into disposable weapons, so those aren't hugely valuable, but I get a decent amount of iron and redstone, which is. Bones are basically wood at this point, so they're nice to have. The real prize, though, is the teeny tiny amount of obsidian that I got from beating up specters and reapers that collected outside the farm, and a single, incredibly lucky drop of a silver helm with the mending enchantment. The other enchantments are dog water, obviously, but that is something that can be fixed. For reasons that should be obvious, my endgame armor set this run will be silver with mending instead of my preferred golem set, and getting a mending helm this early on is just an incredible amount of utility. All of this smelting of iron and farming of redstone, when combined with the stuff I already had in my chests, nets me precisely 32 ingots of iron and 14 dusts of redstone. One of each of these goes towards crafting a single piston, which, fun fact, is one of the relatively few crafted items that isn't gated behind a level requirement. My working theory on this is that whoever did the level balancing isn't a redstone engineer, because this strikes me as an extreme oversight that I wish to immediately exploit. What we have here is the beginning of the end. for my levels of entertainment, at least. Now, what you might be thinking is, okay, Goose, this is just a really terrible lossless cobble farm design. And you would be right, but it is also so much more. If you play the pack enough, you will notice that RLCraft has a ton of mechanics that are just never touched on by the community. Like, it honestly reads like the mods were only added to include 1 or 2 cool features, and then everyone mutually agreed to ignore the other 70% of the content because it doesn't make their sharpness 5000 gigastick to an extra heart of damage or 2. But gee, I'm sure the modded Minecraft player base would never be so myopic, right? Yeah, so anyway, RLCraft has some really neat but mostly unused features, and one of them is anvil crafting. Simply put, if an anvil entity falls on certain blocks, it breaks them down into other blocks. This is, at best, utterly useless in the base game, and even in the current economy, there would be no reason to bother with it if it weren't for one single recipe, and that recipe is gravel, because it turns out getting access to an automatable source of gravel production that isn't reliant on mobs or player labor is kind of unexpectedly convenient. Alternatively, if you have some seed gravel and a fortune enchanted shovel, which I don't, hence the need for an anvil, there is a way of doing this without the anvil that is probably just straight up better unless you're like me and spent 3 hours designing an automated gravel factory when you discovered this mechanic for undisclosed reasons. Level Up Reloaded has a passive that gives you a 10% additional chance of getting flint from gravel per level, and you can level it 10 times. People with basic math skills will read this and immediately conclude that this is a moronic thing to be dropping tens of thousands of points of XP on because the base chance of getting flint is 10%, and even if this was a generous multiplicative buff, a full 10 levels in, it would only raise that chance to roughly 26%, or barely better than a Fortune 2 shovel. This is an example of why English is a terrible language, because I can very easily imagine 3 different equally valid ways to interpret what an additional 10% means here, and all of them are wrong. When Level Up says a 10% chance of flint, what they mean is that for every block of gravel you break, you have a percentage chance equal to 10 times your current level in the skill of spontaneously turning that gravel into flint. This, on the whole, would still be a pretty bad skill, actually. If it weren't for the fact that when your gravel naturally turns to flint on its own, the game gives you 2 flint instead of 1. When you combine this with a Fortune 3 shovel and the existence of a crafting recipe that turns flint back into gravel, which was added by the same mod for some reason, it's basically just a mildly inconvenient way to turn shovel durability and my rapidly waning rations of free time into gravel. And boy do I love gravel. So now that I can officially consider myself the lord of small granular stone masses, what am I going to do with all of it? Well, turn it into dirt, obviously. 2 gravel plus 2 dirt equals 4 coarse dirt, and when you hoe or shovel coarse dirt, it turns back into regular dirt, the renewability of which is a hard requirement for using the Treasure Hunter passive. There were some questions about this on the last video I did, so I did some testing, and it turns out that Treasure Hunter only works on dirt blocks, period. Not sand, not gravel, not even grass, just dirt and dirt paths. Sorry about that. Of course, in order to use the skill, I need to level it up, so joy. In the meantime, it's autumn, I think. Maybe. Kind of hard to tell. Either way, it doesn't really matter anymore, because even in autumn, the acorn yields aren't heroically massive, and they are something of a moot point now that I have enough bones to spam stacks of bone meal on my trees. Mostly I'm doing this for the logs, though, and trees don't really grow in the winter, and I don't have a way of getting around that until I start getting majorly jacked gear, so I see it as well worth my time to hedge my bets, literally and figuratively, and get some more acorns and wood in storage. It's also time to get rid of the really awful spawning platform situation that I have going on over in the desert biome. I clearly do not need flint anymore, and while there are some valuable items that desert mobs can drop, I'm going to need better gear and a better farming solution to really benefit from those. And in the meantime, I would very much appreciate it if angry wargs would stop spawn camping me because I have a giant stone rod of come eat me bridging over to the mobs. Doing all the mob grinding for treasure hunting ends up not being terribly unpleasant, especially now that I'm a bit tankier and have a decent supply of building materials to upgrade the farm with. Wood allows me to make doors and trapdoors, which can serve multiple roles in improving mob throughput rates, and allowing me to do such novel things as not let the mobs walk into the grinder when my back is turned. Obsidian is useful for building a collection chamber at the base that bad creeper interactions can't trash, and I have enough health now that I don't need to worry so much about thorns or bad potion effects one-shotting me every time I so much as dare to sneeze at a mob with advanced thorns armor. It still takes a while, though. Oh, good. Another Lycanite event. Well, I just remembered I forgot to water my pet rhinoceros. It's been real, fellas. Be seeing ya. So, even by the standards of Lycanite's extremely quirked up difficulty scaling, Hell's Fury is a bad one. This is entirely attributable to the existence of a flying skull thing that likes to blow up on top of you in its spawning table. And wouldn't you know it, but flying exploding skull monsters and a delicate island suspended above the void gets on about as well as liquid oxygen does in a grease fire. The only reason that I was saved from having to load from my very outdated backup and throw out a day or so of work here was that I got insanely lucky. The few mobs that spawned before I took the dip in the void didn't blow up my lava, they didn't blow up all of my sugarcane. The only chest they hit was the one full of unimportant junk I collected super early on, and everything that I did lose in this encounter was replaceable. Really, the only thing of value that I lost here was the redstone on my gravel shaft printer, which is unfortunate, but far from an end runner. I made another backup right after I salvaged everything I could, and will definitely be making more of them in the future, but Priority 0 is now no longer game progression. It's making myself somewhere to live that is slightly more resistant to this sort of nonsense, because it is going to happen again, and I might not be able to get out of render distance fast enough when it does. There are oodles of different ways mobs can grease structures in this pack, so any building materials I go with are going to need to be chosen quite carefully. Any sort of wood or log is right out because living on a floating island made out of flammable material is basically just putting in a pre-order for a Darwin Award. Cobblestone and stone are out because cobble can be turned into flowing lava blocks by certain Lycanite mobs existing in their general proximity, and both of them can be infested with silverfish. Snow, dirt, gravel, mulch, and coarse dirt aren't blast-proof enough, or at all. Wool burns, and obsidian is too expensive, which then eliminates basically any vanilla block I have access to. Cool. The modded block scene isn't much better, but I was able to find a block called Lush Stone from Lycanites that can be crafted with grass and cobblestone, but has the unfortunate side effect of looking like a cow sneezes on a wall while chewing its cud. And there's a backport of the smooth stone tiles that are in a later version of vanilla Minecraft that just needs some smelting, which is the one that I'll be going with. Now I just need a small mountain range of cobblestone. Conveniently, by using the power of extremely advanced skyblock technology, 2 armor stands, and a passive that lets me mine stone really, really fast, we can make that. Hold, please. Oh, look! An entire inventory of cobblestone. I'm sure that didn't take forever. Or, you know, Goose setting a stapler on his mouse and walking away for half an hour. Yeah, so anyway, this is actually just the first step, because making smooth stone blocks requires stone, not cobblestone. This is something of a double-edged sword. Smelting cobble into stone will let me benefit from my passive 40% chance of doubling an item, which is good. Unfortunately, even with all the furnace speed buffs, it still requires fuel, which is bad. But I spent most of my stone mining session reading the source code for various mods, so I might have a solution to this. Reskillable, the mod that introduces the level requirements to use items, has an assortment of passive abilities that you can unlock as you progress through its skill tree. As with Level Up's tree, most are irrelevant, but there is one under the building section that allows you to transform certain blocks into certain other blocks using a chorus fruit, of which I have several thanks to all the specters I had to administer high-intensity nap sessions to during my mob grinding adventures. The list of valid transformation targets is pretty terrible, but one of the few useful ones is it allows me to cycle saplings between all 6 of their vanilla variants, which is fantastic, but it doesn't work, because dynamic trees overwrites vanilla saplings with dynamic tree saplings. Poop. I was fairly sure that it intercepted the placement event, and the sapling popping up was just a bug, but I tried it with a hotkey script anyway, and it still didn't work, so I'm gonna put a pin in this particular piece of tech. That sucks. To make matters worse, after a careful and exhaustive search of every combustible item in the game, I can quite confidently say that unless I want to break my rules and use a carpet duper, charcoal blocks are by far the best option. So it looks like my new plan is to suck it up and farm out some certifiably derpy oak trees. This would normally be miserable, but the impact is moderated quite a bit by how stacked my smelting skill is by this point, because I can now cook a hair under 4 stacks of items with a single charcoal block. It also means that I just wasted an hour of research time on a problem whose solution ended up being, do it the normal way, you lazy bum. Huzzah! Game progression. I spared no expense in the creation of my new residence, and after a great deal of hard work and sacrifice, I'm happy to announce that I am the proud new owner of a big stone turd with lamps. Turns out that sparing no expense doesn't really mean all that much when your operational budget has the purchasing power of half a box of stale grape nuts. Really, the biggest improvements here are the existence of such novel things as walls, and a ceiling, and an upgraded floor design that no longer drops me in the void whenever I sit down on it. And I think we will close out the home tour there, because celebrating how the structural integrity of my living space no longer resembles the love child of Schrodinger's cat and a block of Swiss cheese is pretty sad, even by my abysmally low standards. Back to farming. In this case, gravel farming, because I need me some dirt. Hindsight being 2020, I really ought to have been aggressively farming sugarcane as soon as I could plant it, because this run's mid-game lives and dies by my ability to leverage renewable resources, and I can't really do that if I don't have paper for an enchanting setup. I don't know if bookworms will do the passive mob spawning thing, but even if they do, I'm light years away from a disenchanting table, so we will be relying on purely vanilla mechanics to progress that particular tech line, and that sort of requires books. Unfortunately, it's winter, a season famously not known for its ability to support plant life. Unless I can get the resources for greenhouse glass, which, spoilers, I can't, I'm going to be unable to grow sugarcane until next summer, and the rest of the crop options at my disposal are all kind of pointless. This dirt isn't for farming, though. Its purpose is instead to let me grind out a huge stack of random treasure items to see what kinds of useful stuff I can get out of them. Seeing as this is a monumentally shovel-intensive task, this seems like an excellent time to introduce another esoteric piece of tech that never sees the light of day into the run. Because for the first time in, good lord, 12 years that I've been playing this game, I have finally discovered a use for gold, tools, and armor. And not like in a crafting recipe or a meme way or something, I am talking full-on using it as my preferred material for making gear. Gold, unlike iron, silver, or diamond, has no uses in any other important progression path or tech, and I do mean none. In traditional runs, I mostly use it for enchantment farming because the stuff is useless for everything else, and in this specific scenario and modpack, all of its usual downsides are either mitigatable or just straight up irrelevant. Think about it. The low mining level of the pickaxe doesn't come into play because, void world, so unless I need to do some major obsidian excavation, it will be able to break just about everything on the map. I am forbidden from visiting other dimensions, so I don't really have to worry about mobs doing enough damage to one-shot the low durability of my armor pieces, and anything that doesn't one-shot it can be almost immediately repaired with a reskillable perk called Golden Osmosis, which is basically a free, smarter version of mending that drip feeds from your player level instead of environmental XP that you pick up off the floor. The low damage mitigation of gold armor and low damage output of gold weapons is, again, irrelevant because I'm never going to be leaving the overworld, but also because so much of this run's damage economy is determined by stacking passive buffs, enchantments, and baubles that the base stats of your gear kind of don't matter. Like, from the min-maxy slug-it-out mono-y-mono and the Lost Cities perspective, yes, gear material selection is important, but even then, armor durability is the limiting factor, not your damage output or effective HP. For everything else, everywhere else, you can easily go waltzing around in a string bikini bonking things with a wiffle bat, as long as your enchants and passives are up to snuff and the hypothetical bikini is unbreakable. So yeah, point being, if I use gold gear, I could sacrifice a very marginal amount of defense and damage for a set of cheap equipment that boosts the fastest block break times in the game, comes fresh off the enchanting table with an objectively superior passive and free mending effect baked in, and is highly enchantable, with the only requirements being that I have to keep a few XP levels on me to keep the durability bars topped off. Also, as icing on the cake, a full set of gold armor grants me a 50% damage boost to gold weapons, a 20% mining speed buff to gold tools, and resistance to magical sources of damage, just to rub it in. Am I interested? My brother in Christ, by the time I am done signing up, you people are going to need a pry bar to get the pen out of the table. I am sold. Having a functionally unbreakable shovel that instantly mines dirt is a godsend for obvious reasons, so let's finish this up with a batch of dirt and see what treasures await. Go gadget overpowered hotkey scripting. And after converting several stacks of dirt into random junk with my brand new cheese shovel, the results are in, and they are terribly uninspiring. The two standout materials I gained access to are dragon bone, which probably is not going to be super relevant given that I'm using gold for everything, but you never know, and clay, which is utterly useless. The mob spawner might have been more interesting if it was an infinite source of mobs, but it isn't, and it can only spawn pigs, so it's not great, and everything else here has better production options elsewhere. I won't say that dirt conversion is entirely useless, but when the biggest reason to celebrate its abilities is the amount of coal that it produces, you know you do not have a winning strategy. So great, that plan didn't get anywhere. Time for plan B, which is short for being really boring and mining out another buttload of cobble, because I have a mile-long hit list of mobs that I'm going to need to start farming to get access to other materials, and some idiot turned the first batch into an opulent smooth stone panic box because he wanted a secure storage area or something. One of the biggest untapped resource potentials I have access to is the power of slave labor, by which I mean villagers. In addition to all of the obvious trading benefits, a properly designed village can be plumbed up to extract industrial quantities of iron golems and a lycanite mob called an Aegis that has some useful applications entirely separate from its loot table that will come into play later. This is skyblock though, so the only way of getting villagers is curing them, which means I need golden apples, a willing victim, and a way of applying weakness. The first is easy, because I have gold and spades and can get apples, I think it was from a shambler, if I recall correctly, but you can also get them from zombie backpacks or digging them out of the ground if you're desperate, so point remains, I've got apples. Finding a zombie villager is easy, but will become even easier once I start working on my next big mob farm project, so no worries there either. The weakness effect is the tricky part. Witches are utterly unhinged in RLCraft and are far more likely to throw lightning bolts or hand grenades at you than they are to use weakness potions. There are certain enchantments that can apply the effect, but enchanting requires lapis, which I don't own, and applying the effect requires hitting the mob, which will probably kill it, so the best solution is just brewing this stuff myself, which needs blaze rods. Which is why I am currently torturing oak trees, or at least trying to. Cinder farms are nearly as old as RLCraft and have been justifiably nerfed into obsolescence, but if you're hard up for blaze rods and only need a couple, they will still work eventually. Traditionally, you farm cinders with something that burns forever, like netherrack, but I don't have any of that, and the next best thing is an infinitely regenerating oak tree powered by me spamming bone meal on it to refresh its foliage. It won't last forever, and the chances of embers dropping blaze rods is only 10%, but advanced looting 2 should boost the amount that drop, so hopefully we can get some. And also, oak trees are cheap, so it doesn't really matter how many I go through. Platform repairs are less cheap, admittedly, but such is life on RL Block. And after obliterating the our elementals, burning the forests, and investing heavily into industrial war infrastructure, I gotta say, I'm beginning to think the Fire Nation might have had a point. Alrighty, there we go. Turns out, you have to be a certain distance away from the fire for it to spawn the cinders, but not too far, otherwise you're out of range. In other news, figuring out how the spawning code for lycanite mobs worked made me want to eat dirt and bark at the moon. We'll be right back. And there we go! After sacrificing an untold number of oak trees and a small portion of my few remaining brain cells to the cause, I am now the proud owner of some blaze rods. We will politely ignore the chaotic green tentacle monster thing that just ate a cinder turned into a level 60 nightmare ball whose body mass is 55% teeth, and then immediately turned around and started using every single one of those teeth to do really unfortunate things to my insurance premiums. Something tells me that RLCraft is not very happy with my novel problem-solving abilities. Having successfully seized the means of alchemical production via inserting the business end of a gold halberd into the local nightmare factory, we return to our regularly scheduled montage of really boring construction projects. This time around, we're going to be bridging a minimum of 128 blocks away from my base to avoid disrupting its spawning behavior before constructing a really big chunk-aligned platform as low down in the world as I can make it. This will serve the dual purpose of being a really ginormous mob farm that I can selectively snipe or extract high-value mobs from, and as a really ginormous way of prospecting for slime chunks that I can stick a proper farm on later. This also lets me show off a wonderful piece of transportation tech that I like to refer to as the butt-scootin' boogie. You can sit on slabs in this pack, but you can enter the sitting posture from quite a distance away as long as you're clicking on the slab in question. I can then exploit this to send myself sliding across the world at Mach 3, leaving gold-plated skid marks in my wake. This is basically just a modded version of a boat elevator, but I still think it's hilarious, and you're my captive audience, so I get to share it with you. Unfortunately for you all, actual work on the Slime Symposium will need to wait until the next episode. For all the new people that this series has attracted, hi, hello, welcome. We do fun things here, you should stick around. And if you're into that sort of thing, you should also simp for me in the usual make the YouTube algorithm happy ways, because I like money, because I like lecturing to a captive audience. That said, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.